and they departed by another way. Someone suggested last week that I do an instructional Mass sometime. You can do an instructional Mass, pausing to explain what's happening as you do it. And I'd like to do that someday. But the problem is that there's just so much to say. For example, as I walked away and considered this, I thought, well, you really can't understand the Mass until you begin with what happens before you even leave the home. And this is because the Mass requires a journey. And this is a good thing to emphasize today for the Feast of the Epiphany, because we can see all our worship as parallel to the journey of the Magi. One theme of Epiphany is Christ being revealed to the nations. And I could have planned a message about bringing the gospel to others now. But first, we need to understand ourselves, how we are in the place of the Magi. Because, after all, we can't lead others unless we know the way. And for us, encountering Christ remains a journey to a faraway land where we encounter Christ in worship, truly, and then go back by another way. So why is it important to come to church anyway? I mean, immediately, perhaps already in some of your minds is, well, at long last, after that COVID lockdown, which is such a travesty, I started to ask this question 3 years ago, given, why is it important to come to church? We certainly have the command in the book of Hebrews to not forsake the gathering together of the faithful. It's an obligation according to the church, and we know we come to receive the sacraments. But if we boil it down to any one of these things, or all three, if that's all, then we don't understand the journey, and perhaps the most important reason for being here, or at least the most transformative aspect of being here, is completely overlooked. And so, let's consider further then, with the Magi, how we understand their journey, so that we can understand our journey, our worship, and our return. So first of all, the Magi went to a faraway land. And this is significant because many nations were already going in and out of Israel. You didn't need people to come from so far in order to make this story have significance to the nations. There was trading with the nations every day, but they came from far. Now I'd like to quote from Alexander Schmeman's For the Life of the World, which this book in itself is worth 10 instructive masses if you ever look at it. But he points out that the journey begins when Christians leave their homes and beds. They leave, indeed, their lives in this present and concrete world. And whether they have driven 15 miles or walk a few blocks, a sacramental act is already taking place. An act which is the very condition of everything else that is to happen. For they are on their way to constitute the church, or to be more exact, to be transformed into the church of God. So you and I are not the church as individuals, even though we've been baptized into the church. We come to make up the church, to become the church as we have a sacramental encounter. So likewise, the Magi came as individuals, but then an event takes place when their combined gifts say something very distinct and complete about the one they have come to see. And their gathering makes a common witness something that could not have happened if each of them were just there on their own. And in a sense, the one becomes present to us when we gather, and it's only possible when we are together as a whole church. And in this sense, Schmemann is telling us that we've already gone beyond the categories of common worship and prayer, as important as that is. We don't just come together to be strengthened, to receive grace, to become better Christians. No, we come here to make present the one in whom all things are at their end and in whom all things are at their beginning. And so in this sense, we are coming as they are to a new Jerusalem. Now the Magi, they came to a place that would have been very foreign to them. They came from very far. Not like these other nations that were in and out of Jerusalem on a daily basis. Likewise, we come to a place, as we come to the kingdom of God, as we come to New Jerusalem, it should seem in some ways foreign to us, very different from the world outside. As Schmemann continues, the liturgy begins when as a real separation from the world. In our attempt to make Christianity appeal to the man on the street, we have often minimized or even completely forgotten this necessity of separation. We always want to make, or it seems like many people always want to make Christianity understandable and acceptable to this mythical modern man on the street, whoever he may be. And we forget that the Christ of whom we speak is not of this world. So in this sense, we encounter the sacraments, which are mysteries. And so everything that we do should point to that mystery, signs that point beyond us, beyond this world. And so in this sense, we're constantly laboring against iconoclastic elements in the world, trying to elements that want to get rid of these mystical signs, to make the language of the liturgy more understandable to the person on the street. And perhaps it's not an accident that these Magi probably came from Persia to these parts of the world that are very Muslim right now, where the symbol, the sacrament, these icons have been denied. But in the modern world as well is very iconoclastic. Just give me what's utilitarian. Just give me what gets the job done. And haven't we seen the church adopt some of these elements as well in recent years? When this happens, we lose sight of what is truly happening at the Mass. And this is that new Jerusalem where we go out of this world. This is that heavenly Jerusalem. If we truly go, like the Magi, to a faraway land, then we are going out of what's familiar to this encounter. So from a faraway land, that's just our first point. The next 2 points build very much on that, which is the worship that they do, and in their worship itself, the journey continues. Here the Magi encountered what? But the symbol of symbols, the Word made flesh. He who has seen Jesus has seen the Father in heaven. This is more that they could put into words, or we can put into words. It was 400 years later when the incarnation was described as the two natures of Christ, distinct yet indivisible, from the Council of Chalcedon. Yet the Magi had, in encountering this, understood this in a way that was beyond their ability to articulate. And so it is, while God gives us an intellect and God gives us senses, He calls us to go beyond that. Where a two-dimensional picture, a transparency, some of these ones that some of us remember these viewfinders that we had that were popular in the 60s and the 70s. You look through them and you click the trigger and the picture goes around, and because of the two lenses, you see it in 3D in this little box. You can still see the picture apart from that box. 3D, it takes on another dimension. But really what Schmemann's saying, and what we need to understand, is that the worship brings us beyond that, even to a fourth dimension, which allows us to see, he says, the ultimate reality of life. So on one hand, we go outside this world, the commonplace world that is merely three-dimensional, to a fourth dimension that is a reality. It is a present reality. We make it present as we constitute the church, and the beginning, the end, is present for us here. And he says, from this vantage point, we can see more deeply into the reality of the world. And so it is that we continue to journey. But as we do this, we ourselves are changed. Because when the Magi saw the Christ, what does it say? Or when they saw the star finally stop, it says that they rejoiced exceedingly with great joy. In the world, in the mere three-dimensional of our senses of the world, you get pleasure, you get some measure of happiness, but not joy. Joy is something that is transcendent, that comes from outside the world, but yet, through our Creator and Redeemer, it can be present in the world. That's why C.S. Lewis, in his autobiographical book about his conversion, is called Surprised by Joy. This is what changed him when he encountered joy. And he said, if God put joy in this world, in a flower, for example, that must point to something more meaningful than what is merely utilitarian. And so it is, when we encounter joy, then we are changed. As Peter says, and was quoted in our collect for today, or actually it's in our preface that we'll encounter later on in the Mass, the morning star must rise in our hearts. It's that journey that must take place when we arrive, when we are changed. And when this happened to the Magi, when this happened to the Magi, they departed, but they were not the same. For what does it say when they left? It says, they departed by another way. On their way to the Christ, they went by the means of the world. They consulted with worldly authorities. They consulted with Herod. But after they encountered Christ, they no longer consulted with worldly authorities. They had seen something different. They departed by another way. And no doubt when they went back to their kingdoms, they brought a measure of that kingdom with them. And so it has always been in the Eucharist, and so it was for the disciples. For if we encounter Christ, then if we go to that faraway land, then what are we doing? We are ascending, so to speak, as the one comes down and is made present for us. And in that ascension, then we are immersed in the new life of the kingdom. That's the faraway land that is made present to us in the Mass, that transforms us. And in this light, this joy of peace, what do we have? We don't have programs and theories, but as Maimon says, for the earliest Christians, wherever they went, the seeds of the kingdom sprouted. Faith was kindled. Life was transfigured. Things impossible were made possible. They were witnesses. And when they were asked, whence shines this light? Where is the source of this power? They knew what to answer and where to lead those men. So this is the threefold action of our worship that the Magi encountered. Yes, they went to a faraway land. They encountered him, which is for us a true encounter. And then as we return, we go by another way. That kingdom goes with us. And so when this happens, we ultimately become, this is how the nations encounter the Christ. Not by making our worship like that of the world, but by pointing them to something that is outside of the world, but yet forms the deepest reality of the world that previously they could not see. And unless we continue this journey, unless this is what we're after, then we do not realize that we never get anywhere because we never leave any place behind us. But here's the goal: to leave, to come. This is the beginning the starting point of this sacrament, the condition of its transforming power and reality. And so let us enter more deeply into this reality. As we bring ourselves to the altar, we become united with Christ, and then we bring him out to a wanting world.